Have you guys ever heard the story about the barber and the salesman? This salesman was going to be doing some business in Europe, and he wanted to get a haircut before he left. So he went in, his barber, and they were chatting away, and they were having a conversation. And he mentioned that he was going to be taking a trip to Rome, Italy. And that piqued the interest of the barber because he had lived in northern Italy earlier in his life. And he said, I think you're going to be really disappointed with that. He said, what airline are you taking? And the salesman mentioned the airline. He said, that is the worst airline. Their seats, they're jam-packed. You have no space. Their food's terrible. And their flights are never on time. He's like, well, what hotel are you going to be staying at when you get over there? And the salesman mentioned the hotel, what part of the city. He said, that's the worst part of the city. He said, and the service at that place is awful. He said, you might as well just stay home. And the salesman's like, well, I've got a major piece of business that I'm doing over there. And he said, beside that, I want to see the Pope afterwards. And he's like, well, you're going to be disappointed trying to do business in Italy. And besides that, the Pope only sees important people. He's not going to be seeing you. So the salesman, kind of slinked out, and 3 weeks later he came back, needed another haircut. So he walks in, and the barber's like, "Oh, how'd the trip go?" And he's like, "It was awesome." Said, "My flight was amazing. I got there early. That hotel we stayed at, best service ever." He said, "I closed that sale. It was amazing." He said, and he kind of paused for effect. He's like, "And I got to see the Pope." The barber's engaged now, man. He's like, "No way." He said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I was at the front of the crowd, and our eyes met, and the Pope motioned me forward." He said, "So I went up, and I bent over, and I kissed his ring." And he said, and he put his hand on my head, and he said, "What'd he say? What'd he say?" He's like, "My son, where did you get such an awful haircut?" No single change you make in your life will have a greater positive impact on you and those around you than making a choice to improve your attitude. This session is all about attitude. I love the writings of Viktor Frankl. And one of his quotes is, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Now, why is that such an amazing quote? Because of the person who wrote it. I don't know if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl, but he was an Austrian Jew who spent 3 years of his life in Nazi concentration camps, 4 different camps. And during that time, he watched his parents, his brother, and his pregnant wife all die in those camps. So when somebody who's gone through that writes a statement like that, I'm paying attention. He believed deeply that many things happen in our life, and I think we could all agree with this and resonate with this, that are totally outside of our control. He had no control over those circumstances around World War II. But he also believed that regardless of whatever happens to us in life, our response to those circumstances, how we choose to respond, we have total control over that. And in his belief, and he wrote so much about this, he was a prolific author, that we can find meaning in any circumstance in life. I mean, think about that. So often our lives are so centered around the circumstances of life. When things are good, I'm good. When things are bad, life is bad. But his belief was, no, regardless of the circumstances, in fact, because of some of the hardest circumstances and situations and things that happen to us in life, we can find meaning in those. And we can move forward with this renewed sense of purpose. Imagine how different your life would be when you start to live that way. In your notes on page 18, what executives look for in a promotional appraisal. Look at these things. Ambition, skills, attitude toward the company, attitude toward people, an attitude toward excessive demands on time and energy. See a theme there? 4 out of the 5 things they're looking at in an appraisal all go back to a person's attitude. Now, we use this term all the time. I love looking at words and what they mean. And here's one that I really like. It's a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. It's a great definition. Think about that. A settled way of thinking. We all have a settled way of thinking, right? We're talking about habits of the mind here. When you hear the term habit, what do we usually think about? Yeah, bad, a behavior, right? One that we want to change typically. Like this compulsion I have inside of me every night at 9 o'clock to go get a snack out of the refrigerator, and how hard that habit is to break, right? But where do those habits of behavior start with? Where's the origin of those? The origin of those is in our mind, a settled way of thinking. James Allen, in his classic, As a Man Thinketh, this is a great book to put on your reader's list. This came out in 1903. British author, phenomenal. James Allen said this: a man is literally what he thinks. Now think about this. Literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts. As the plant springs from and could not be without the seed, so every act of a man springs from the hidden seeds of thought and could not have appeared without them. That's powerful. Look at the results in your life. Look at the behaviors in the life. Look at the patterns in your life, and you can always trace them back to seeds of thought that entered our mind in one way, shape, or form that we chose to harbor, reflect on, allow to influence us in such a way that it shapes our character. This is how significant this issue is. So where does this settled way of thinking come from? Well, it comes from the environments that we find ourselves in life. And there are all kinds of environments that we find ourselves in. What is an environment? They're the surroundings or conditions in which we live. And why are they so powerful? Because they're constantly influencing us. They're never not influencing us at all times. Think about the various environments that we live in. Some of these we have no control over. You have no control over. You know, the physical environment that you were born into. Was it safe? Was it loving? You know, was it one that caused you to become fearful at an early age? Our family environment, you know that old statement, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. Absolutely. That was a hugely influential environment of our lives, right? Where we learned values and philosophies about life, attitudes about other people, beliefs about God, perspectives about money, work, those in authority, you name it. Powerful environment. Over time, these things begin to influence us, however, at a subconscious level. A subconscious level, and then they become the lens through which we see the world. They literally become our map of the world. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Those environments become a huge influencer of how we see the world. And you know what? You know what's really interesting about this? They aren't always positive. And secondly, they're so ingrained in our subconscious, we don't even realize the impact that they're having on our lives. Which is why in coaching, one of the primary objectives in coaching is raising self-awareness on the part of the client. To help a client see what he doesn't see. All real learning happens at a subconscious level. Okay? And so coaching is a lot about what Carl Jung talks about. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. How many people do you know kind of live their lives that they're almost the innocent bystander on the side of the road, watching their life play out in front of them? And they see all these things happening in their life as if they have no control over them. No control. What's going on there? This is exactly what's going on there. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life. And you will call it fate. I just was born into the wrong family. I just wasn't dealt the right deck of cards, right? I mean, you've heard this. I wasn't put on the right team at work. I had the wrong kind of a boss. You hear these things all the time. People don't even realize what they're saying. It's their map of the world influencing every outcome in their life. You know, as we move toward adulthood, however, and this is a very encouraging reality, we have more and more control over those environments. How about our mental environment? You ever think about your mind being an environment? There's a surrounding there, okay? The thoughts we choose to allow to enter our minds and think upon. That's why I very rarely watch the news anymore. Oh my word. What kind of an outlook are you going to have about the world if you get a steady diet of ABC every night? The world is on fire. Somebody has the nuclear codes. Somebody just got poisoned. Some company just cheated somebody out of the retirement. I mean, you name it. There's a positive segment on the news, and when does it happen? 3 minutes at the end of the hour, one little 30-second blip about somebody who made a difference in the world. The rest of the 27 minutes are absolute filled with toxic negativity. I mean, imagine the impact of that when you now translate ABC to CNN or Fox News, and now you've got the 24-hour news cycle. How awesome is that? Controlling our mental environment, what we choose to allow into our minds, has a massive influence on our life. Our people environment, you do have a choice about who you choose to surround yourself with. To a certain degree, we don't have a choice. There are certain people we have to work with. But you have this concept of an inner circle that you can choose, right? People that you can intentionally invite into your life because they're a positive influence, because they bring very valuable things into you and they help steer you in a positive direction that it's in harmony with the highest version of yourself. Environments are huge. What kind of an attitude are you cultivating? You have total control over this, even if you think you don't. I love the attitude inventory questions, and there's two in particular. If you look at those, page 19, do you foster, what a great word, foster a healthy attitude in yourself for your organization? How would you know? Do you foster a healthy attitude in yourself for your family, friends, and coworker? That's powerful. We have huge influence. As people, we're created as social beings, and we cannot not be affected by the emotional state of others. You can't not be, as a function of being a human being. So what kind of a attitude are you bringing to your team? Okay, attitude principle number 1. I'm going to give you kind of 3 foundational principles about this whole thing that we're talking about, attitude. Number 1, our attitude is a choice. Maybe you've seen this prayer. Dear Lord, so far today, I'm doing all right. I've not gossiped, lost my temper, been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or self-indulgent. I haven't whined, cursed, or eaten any chocolate. However, I'm going to get out of bed in a few minutes, and I'll need a lot more help after that. Amen. John Wooden once said, things turn out the best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out. What's he saying? He's saying that your attitude is a choice. My son is, you probably can't pick him out here, but my son is, he's on an AAU basketball team here in inner city Erie, and he is absolutely loving it. And these boys are from Strong Vincent and Cathedral Prep and East and Central, but he loves his coach. I don't know if my pointer works. Yeah, that's Coach T, Daryl Roberts. And this guy is amazing. He has such a passion for these young men. And his whole desire is not about basketball, but so that they can learn the kind of skills that allow them to succeed in life. He takes them to these tournaments, these exposure tournaments, so that they can be seen by scouts and that they can play well enough so they can get a scholarship and really be able to build a future. And so he's huge on attitude. He's always preaching responsibility. You think I'm passionate? Holy mackerel. This guy is off the hook passion. And Joel just loves him. But last week there in this tournament, 500 teams in Akron called the Drew Joyce Invitational. I mean, they had teams from all over the country, scouts from all over the country. And they had 4 different games. They got there late on Friday, kind of got hammered by 20 on Friday night, came out on Saturday morning, won their first game by 20. That was the game they played well. You can see the scoreboard. Third game, they lost again by 20. And then at 7 o'clock on Saturday night, they had one more game, played a team from Texas. Had to win that game in order to advance to Sunday. And this was really important to me because I had reservations at a hotel that I couldn't get my money back from. In addition to that, I ran into a friend out in the lobby this morning who lives in Akron. I could have stayed there. That was awesome too. But anyhow, the game started and the refs, at one point in the first half, they were counting the fouls. The refs had called, Steve, you'll appreciate this, 15 fouls on us and 2 for the other team. And the fans were just having a fit. And you could see it started, this fans started complaining. They're starting to count the fouls in the stands now. And then the players are feeding off this negative energy. And you could see them cop after every call. Like, man, they're like throwing a face and walking around and ticked off. And Daryl is not saying anything. No facial expression, no response till about after 10 minutes. He said, 15-2. It should be more than 15, the fouls. You see the way you guys are playing defense? You're not moving your feet. You're kind of just waving at them when they go by. There should be 15 fouls. He totally turned the culture of what was going on, turned it back on those kids and said, you are responsible for you right now, right here, your attitude. What are you going to do? I love that. That's what we're talking about. Your attitude is a choice, and your attitude will determine your approach to life. Our attitude determines our approach to life. No, they lost. They lost by 3. It was a great game, and I had to stay in that hotel because I wasn't going home. No way, baby. Akron's a wonderful place to vacation. Our attitude determines our approach to life. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, right? So David Gutman wrote this book called The Power of Positivity. And I love what he develops here. He explains what psychologists refer to as explanatory styles, which has to do with how people process and interpret problems. Okay, so there are three basic ways that we process and interpret problems, and here they are. Okay, so one, did this happen because of me, internal? Am I the problem? Or because of something outside of me? Is this an external circumstance? Second, will this always happen to me? Stable. Or can I change what caused it? Unstable. Carol Dweck wrote a great book called Mindset. She's done a lot in education, compares the fixed with the growth mindset. You can see a real rigid perspective here, can't you, in a person's thinking. Is this something that affects all aspects of my life, pervasive, or was it solitary? Was the occurrence limited? Now check this out. The pessimist sees problems as internal, unchangeable, and pervasive. Now think about that kind of a mindset. If that's your mindset, no wonder you're pessimistic, right? That's how you see the world. But the optimist tends to see problems as external, changeable, and isolated. It's not always going to be this way. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to grow from this. It'll be different next time. The outcome will change. This is just an isolated experience. Our attitude determines our approach to life. I love this quote by Dennis Woolley. He said, expecting the world to treat you fairly just because you are a good person is like expecting a bull not to charge you because you're a vegetarian. And last, our attitude can turn our problems into blessings. Several years ago, I'm going to need my glasses for this. When I was a young pastor, one of my first responsibilities was to, and all the senior pastors of the churches that were going in with this initiative were super happy to hand it off to the green new guy. But my responsibility was to bring in a motivational speaker to a number of area local schools. His name was Dave Reaver. And we were reaching out to thousands of students in multiple schools, and then we were going to hold a rally that evening and invite everybody to it. Dave has a phenomenal connection, not only with high school students, but with military personnel as well. And he has the ability to relate to people who've come from really tough situations, drug addiction, broken homes, people who have self-image issues. The way he relates to those kids is, I mean, it's mysterious and powerful to watch it happen. But what makes it so powerful is the backdrop of his life. And I'm going to read this to you because I think it's more powerful if I read it than trying to re-describe what happened to him. I'm going to show you another picture here. I forgot to advance. These are just a couple of pictures at him and his rallies. But this next picture is just, here he was, early on as a Vietnam soldier, or a soldier in the Vietnam War. And he said, while serving on the boat in Vietnam, tragedy struck hard. The guns on his boat engaged in a firefight. They were letting off 500 rounds a minute per gun against the shore, where enemy fire was being returned from a bunker. Seeing the enemy position, Dave picked up a white phosphorus hand grenade, pulled the pin, and drew back his hand to throw it. It was 6 inches from his right ear. Before he could throw the grenade, a sniper's bullet struck the grenade, causing it to explode prematurely in Dave's hand. A phosphorus grenade explosion causes severe injuries and/or death in 3 ways: burning deep into tissue, inhaled as a smoke, and being ingested. The phosphorus burns at a temperature of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Extensive exposure by burning and ingestion is typically fatal. No kidding. When Dave realized what happened, he jumped into the water. His body was on fire, but phosphorus fire is unaffected by water, so Dave's skin was still burning. When he surfaced from the water and inhaled air, he sucked fire down into his lungs, bronchial tubes and throat, scorching the insides of his mouth and vocal cords. After surfacing, Dave said his next words were, "God, I still believe in you." The effects of the explosion were devastating, and the intense heat nearly eviscerated him. About 70% of his flesh just instantly melted off of his body. The grenade had blown apart his chest and left a gaping cavity. You could literally see his heart beating through a hole. His right hand and left arm were on fire. His head was on fire and had burned his scalp, ears, nose, lips, and eyelids. Dave was left blind in his right eye, deaf in his right ear, and the entire right side of his head was burned down to the skull. The right side of his face was blown back so far his tongue almost fell out of his mouth. The medics loaded Dave on the helicopter and thought he was dead. They had put his dog tags in his teeth. When he was first put on the stretcher, he burned through it, and he jokes about this. It's kind of comical as he jokes about it. Fell and hit the ground. He said, "I was having a really bad day." Dave was evacuated to a medical post in Japan where doctors didn't expect him to live. After surviving the initial shock, he was transported to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. The wives would see their husbands for the first time in the burn ward, badly burned and bandaged, some unrecognizable. Many of them literally laid their wedding bands next to their spouses' beds and walked out. The women were unable to emotionally cope with their husbands' disfigurements and chose to abandon them. Suffice it to say, Dave was more than anxious as he awaited his wife's arrival. Brenda walked in and was unable to recognize his disfigured body. She actually went up and read the chart on his bed to confirm it was him. Then she read the tag on his arm to be positive. Convinced it was her husband, she bent down, kissed his face, looked him in his good eye, and said, "I want you to know I love you. Welcome home, Davy." He said, "When she calls me Davy, I know it's all good." Straining to speak, he softly said, "I'm sorry, Brenda, that I won't be good looking anymore." Brenda replied, "That's okay, Dave. You weren't that good looking in the first place." I think that's a great story. It's a great story of triumph over tragedy. It's a great story of someone who chose to take something unimaginable, beyond what we could even consider happening to us. Horrific. That he would live with the rest of his life, and you can see some of these pictures. Multiple hundreds of surgeries. And he would turn that into an opportunity to impact and influence and make a difference in the lives of thousands upon thousands of people. Students, military people who have gone through similar experiences, dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome, they have a huge ministry to those people. And it's because he chose to turn a problem into a blessing. And he is one of the most infectious, happy, fun to be around people. He can make you laugh like nobody. He's full of life because of one thing, because of his attitude. I'm a person of faith. I was in the ministry for 20 years. And that has always been one of my deep beliefs. Going back to what Viktor Frankl wrote, is that probably in this auditorium we have people who've gone through a lot of hard things, going through some very difficult things right now. And those circumstances have a heavy influence on our lives and the way we see the world. And I want to encourage you, one of the things that were most significant to me about my faith in God is that I have a deep belief in his sovereignty, and that he doesn't allow things that come into our life by accident. And when you believe that things don't come into your life by accident, but all the things that happen in our life happen for a real reason and purpose, it changes the way you think about life. And it helps you to look at these situations and learn from them and grow from them and become bigger on the inside because of them. And believe that through these situations, I can have a greater, bigger influence and impact on people's lives than I would ever have had they not come into my life. This is a huge principle. 4 quick attitudes, just write these down, I'm not even going to spend any time on them, that I think are great attitudes to cultivate. Humility, teachability. I mean, humility to me is the foundational character quality. It makes it possible for you to be a teachable person, a learner. Gratitude, being grateful, and resilience. As we've done in the past, let's just take a minute and I want you to write down, as you think about and reflect on those three principles, for you, what's that most salient point in principle that can have the biggest influence on the cultivation of a positive, healthy attitude in your own life?